Mystery and Deceit from Earth to Mars. Book 1 of Chaos's Orbit Saga. Written by James T. Hall. Narrated by Chris Pullman. Episode 13. Martian Vegetables. Eric had risen and beckoned me sit at his kitchen table while he put something on his stove. He hadn't done more than chop a few items from his fridge and add them to a pot he likewise had pulled from his fridge. After a lengthy discussion on the finer points of nanite technology and terraforming, both because of the concentration it had required to keep up with Eric as well as the time, I found myself hungry. As I scrawled notes, Eric tended to his cooking. "Soup should be about ready now," Eric said in reply to the loud growl from my stomach. "Care for a bowl?" He reached into a cupboard to the left of the stove and pulled out 2 oversized mugs labeled in equally oversized letters, "Soup." I decided that after the ordeal Eric had put me through that if he was offering me food, I'd better take it. Sure. What are we having?" I asked. "Simple vegetable soup, made with a Milky Way base. Here." Eric handed me a bowl, plunking a soup spoon and torn off hunk of French bread into the bowl. "Let me know what you think. It's a recipe I've been working on a while." I almost feared the question, but asked anyway. "How long of a while?" "Oh, about 73 years, come Earth Standard August." I knew I'd regret the question. I began eating, trying to figure out what all he had put in the soup. "Enjoying the soup?" Eric asked as I continued to sip at it. "Yes," I said, still focusing on the cornucopia of flavors. Pepper and garlic were definitely there. I could plainly see leafy parts floating around the bowl, as well as cuts of celery and onion. There was more depth, though, to the soup than just that. A savory element kept my mouth watering even as it was full of yellow-white liquid. "No, you're not," Eric said around a mouthful of soup-soaked bread. "You're analyzing it. You're losing some of the flavors when you do that. Treat it like a magic show. Don't try to figure it out. Just enjoy it. Leave the worrying to the chef." Eric did have a point. The soup was delicious, and if I were to keep focusing on its taste the whole time, I would be done with it before I could enjoy it. I took a moment, closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, then inhaled the aroma wafting from my bowl. "There you go," Eric said. "Don't try to figure it out. Just welcome it in and let the smell happen." It was delightful. Somehow I suddenly caught myself remembering the kitchen back home when I was a kid. Mom tried to add her own flair to dishes, but normally ended up ruining the dish in the process. Synth food had everything in it needed anyway. At least so I had thought. Even a steaming bowl of synth miso couldn't hold a flame to the rapture of scents my nose was experiencing. Faintly again, there was the pepper, garlic, some rosemary, a hint of parsley. I opened my eyes surprised. "Found more than what you were looking for, right?" "Yeah, I did," I said. That's always how Meng tried to describe his prescience to us. If he tried to force it, he would lose focus on the very thing he sought. If, however, he just let the prescient thought wave over him, he found what he was looking for every time. Took me a long while to understand that and build the same sort of discipline. "Soup helps, though, doesn't it?" Eric asked wryly, taking another spoonful. Once more I felt the professor in him coming through. "Don't let me stop you," he said around another bite of bread. "Keep going." "Let go and just taste it," he told me, motioning at my bowl with the odd end of his spoon. I closed my eyes, dunked my spoon, and brought it to my mouth. The aroma again wafted before me, bringing to mind some of the plants I had seen in Eric's living room. I took in the soup, letting it sit on my tongue just long enough, chewing slowly on the bits that needed it. Celery, onions, broccoli, a milk and muskiness, some mushroom slices, as well as a taste of potato. Swallowing, I felt the soup warm my throat and stomach. Experiencing the soup this way somehow made me feel re-energized. Sometimes the simple act of letting go, of living in the moment, is all that is needed to sustain and recharge us, Eric said clearly. My eyes were still closed. I guessed that he must have been watching me closely and reacted to the expression I had shown. "Soup itself is quite a thing. Doesn't have much substance to it, really," Eric said, to some dripping and splashing. Opening my eyes, I found him ladling his soup with his spoon, watching as it fell back into the bowl. There are larger chunks, smaller chunks, spices, dissolved bits, and then the water that makes up the bulk of it. And yet, lacking such substance as this, he said, holding up what remained of his bread in his other hand, it is still vitally re-energizing, isn't it? He expected no reply, so I didn't try to give one. Eric quietly finished the rest of his soup and bread, as he had admonished me to. The presence this man exuded was completely unique in my years of experience. Something about him engendered a whole host of emotions and empathies. Watching him eat, though, one came through stronger than the rest. Loneliness. We finished our soup in silence and continued so for a few minutes. Eric had turned to look out his back windows into his yard. There I could see his small personal garden along with his few fruit trees. Not an atypical sight these days, such a use of a yard. Ever think about those? Eric motioned toward his garden. How they got here, I mean. I actually hadn't. The first colonists, after all, hadn't come to Mars with much, and nowhere in the historical records was there ever mention a want for sustenance. I guess that I just always assumed they were brought with colony missions. My mind traced back to Eric's comments about the terraforming process. Such would have been done with plants meant for harsh environs, not such temperamental plants as crops. I'm sorry to say it this way, but do you really think the first colonists, construction workers and the like, would generally have had the know-how to breed plants native to Earth to survive here on Mars? Between the differences in soil, gravity, and season length, Earth crops just didn't do well. Sure, when you get summer here it lasts twice as long, and so you have double the growing season. What do you think that does to crops, though? They're still used to a set season length. They grow, produce, then die. Martian varieties have double seasons, though, I commented. Well, naturally. We engineered them that way. Twice as long a year here, twice as much food needed to get you through that year. So why not take advantage of the extended summer seasons? So it was your people who modified the crop strains, I said. Yep. Didn't have time to do it in the old-fashioned way, though. How's that, I asked. The old-fashioned way, selective breeding, forcibly crossing plants that began producing again instead of dying at the end of the season. We went a different route. We used nanites to go in and forcibly reprogram the plants to produce twice in a season. Took a little bit of trial and error, I'll admit. Pesky bugger that switch in their genome. For being such well-understood organisms, plants are still annoyingly complex. So what you're saying, I said, suddenly wishing I hadn't put my note tab to sleep while eating, is you basically created those, pointing to Eric's backyard, Martian plant strains. Yep, that was us. What about the Martian-Terran hybrids on Earth? The immortal strains, Eric replied. Those were a product of our tinkering once again with nanites here on Mars at the university. Ironically, we were just looking to create new strains of crops that could withstand, or rather tolerate, larger temperature swings and so have an even longer growing season here. We quickly figured out, though, that put in a Goldilocks climate on Earth, they would just keep producing all year round. I will admit, though, immortal apples do taste a bit off. Never able to work that out before our research was shut down. Again. I remembered Eric talking about their attempt to revive nanite technology on Mars. So are there still nanites guiding plant growth, I asked? Eric shifted his eyes back to me, a glint appearing in them to accompany his smirk. That's a good question. We thought about it, but the result would have been introduction of nanites into the general human population, an eventuality we didn't want to have to deal with at the time. So rather than doing so, we had the nanites self-terminate once the plant genomes were successfully reprogrammed. They've been out of any type of Martian crop for 200 years, hybrids for about 150. And I can assure you that there are no stragglers that didn't knock off. We checked. I assumed he meant him and his fellow scientists. So Eric, I said, a thought occurring to me, if you've lasted so long, how many of the others are left? His eyes took on a panged look before he quickly squeezed them shut, opening them to look longingly again out the window. None, came the slow, flat answer, filled with the same loneliness I had felt minutes before. It was a loneliness that suddenly made sense. After our attempt to revive the tech was silenced, the few of us that remained decided to give up. The nanites prolong life, to be sure, but only if you allow them to. So you can, turn them off? I asked. Over centuries of living with them, we gained deeper understanding of and control over them than we ever could have imagined in the beginning. Instead of needing an external interface to rewrite their base code, we figured out how to set up the same thing mentally in mind space. From there, self-adaptation of nanites was easy, including the ability to insert a kill switch. Long ago we came to a realization. Humans are not meant to be immortal. So not to open a wound further, I said, but why are you still here, Eric? Why didn't you allow yourself to go quietly into the dark night? Because I still have one last mission to complete. Once that is done, then I can rest. Why not pass it on to somebody else? I asked. Eric again turned his gaze back to me, a quirky, wry smile on his face. The nanitic life within me, the mission I have yet to complete, or both, he asked. I hadn't thought about the nanites yet within him. If none existed in the modified plants, and no more of the original nanitics of the TDF yet lived, then, assumedly, those still active within Eric were the last of their kind in the universe. They were an endangered species. Both, I guess, I replied. Soon enough, Eric replied, turning his focus back to his garden. When the time is right. He gazed at those plants as a father his child, seeing it grow up while also remembering everything that brought the child to this point in its life, all in an instant. My mind once again caught a passing thought. The introduction of immortal Martian-Terran hybrids to near-equator regions in Earth had been an emergency response to the great crop extinction of the 2420s and 2430s, the very event that had precipitated the great Martian migration of the same period. These days, of course, Terran farmers were once again growing healthy crops, diversifying their strains using the wide variety of reintroduced heirloom varieties. Eric, did you and your people have a hand then in helping to save Earth from the crop extinction? Beyond just the infusion of hybrid plants, I mean. Behind the scenes, yes. When we first came here, we brought as many crop species as we could, not knowing which one or which parts would be best suited for Martian life. Darn good thing, too, considering how dumb the Terran crop monitors had become. I felt a pang of disgust and self-loathing. My great-grandfather had been one of those crop monitors whose reliance on a single species of corn, potatoes, tomatoes, etc. had led to the near-instant death of all food crops on Earth. Not even the swift action of continental governments could stop the spread of necrotic diseases that swept through all corners of the globe, leaving farmland completely barren in its path. Such a lesson in crop diversity had come at nearly too high a price. So then, you had a hand in the vegetable ark? Again, Eric smiled wryly. Sure did, Sonny. Ironic, isn't it? The exiles from Earth, once again saving its sorry ass. Kind of like the cast-out child coming back home to care for its parents. In truth, had it not been for us, all crop agriculture on Earth would probably have gone the way of handwritten correspondence by now. And with how humanity is trending these days, what a shame that would have been. An undercurrent of sudden cynicism had worked its way into Eric's voice. What do you mean, how humanity is trending? I asked. Eric turned away from his backyard garden to face me fully, and in his face something had changed. Something was now there that hadn't been before. Not even during the odd episode where he had talked as a chorus had Eric's face held what it did now. Nearly dark foreboding, his countenance somehow seemed to dim his features. It was as if an overhead light had been turned off. What I mean is that humanity is growing soft, he practically growled. For years, someone has always been there to hold up its weak and decrepit form. Ever on the razor's edge, humanity has, for a long time, had a steadying hand. It has weakened a once great people. Once one that was capable, under the right leadership, of taking on even those who were nearly superhuman. But the years have been less than kind to we evolved apes. What has humanity done in times of crisis? Stood and fought it? Or rather ran off to safe havens among the stars? Only the weak flee their homes under duress. The strong-willed stand and fight to the last man if necessary. Yet glowering, he said oddly, I recognize you, faintly, as though I once saw you through a foggy spyglass. Then, once more, he was silent. A light seeming to come on over his head again, illuminating his face. His countenance had changed, and once again, he had an expression of trying to remember a dream. He looked at me questioningly, realization dawning on his face. I'm sorry about that. It's part of what's going on inside you? I asked probatively. Yes, it is. Can you tell me? Eric stared into my eyes, a gaze that seemed to penetrate my very soul. It's not yet time for that, he replied. I need a few moments to think. Would you mind waiting for me in the living room? He asked, nearly absent-mindedly as he rose and headed out his back door. I could feel the warm spring breeze filter into the kitchen, bringing with it that ever-present odor of rust. Sure thing, I barely managed before the door closed. Grateful for the chance to try and put to memory what had just happened, I sat in my chair in Eric's living room. It was quite odd, 2 different abnormalities as I had seen now. I suppose schizophrenia would be the closest approximation. Though somewhere within me I understood that what was going on, what was happening to Eric, had a deeper meaning than I could possibly fathom. And, after all, one's countenance may change with alternative personalities, but not the color of one's eyes. After very careful reflection, I decided that while the seeming dimming of Eric's face would also fit such a hypothesis of something else, it surely must have been a cloud blocking the sun. After all, how could light actually retreat from around a person? Such could not happen, even in this new world of wild possibilities into which I was entering. Or so I thought. After getting my thoughts down and writing some notes on questions to ask Eric, I found myself focused on his small shelf of houseplants and herbs. Some were just beginning to flower along with the change in season. Others had new buds forming, showing signs of growth yet to come. Even on the edges of the shelf, there stood sprigs of plants suspended in water, root systems beginning to grow. The plants outside in Eric's garden, with their greater tolerance for temperature extremes, were already growing small sprouts that would become vegetables and fruits. These, though, had to be domestic varieties, a variant of Terran heirloom strains, which had been turned to the double long Martian seasons. Suddenly I realized something about the plants. They were all drooping. With as much care and attention as Eric had been paying them earlier, this seemed quite odd. As I stared at them, though, they seemed to begin to strengthen. Stalks seemed to straighten, leaves to stiffen to an expected outstretched windowward arc. I heard the back door slowly open and close as Eric entered his kitchen, poured 2 glasses of water, and rejoined me. So, he said, handing me a glass. You okay to keep going? Sure I am. Are you? Yeah, I'm fine now. Just needed a minute to center myself. The plants on Eric's stand once more had their healthy pink-green glow. Do you have anything you need to attend to at the university? I asked. I wouldn't want to keep you from students. Actually, my time there is over. Shall we continue? Mystery and Deceit from Earth to Mars. Book 1 of Chaos's Orbit Saga. Written by James T. Hall. Narrated by Chris Pullman. Episode 13. Martian Vegetables.